Alright, draft physics video. Off for the day again. But, at least there's some use in this for the bigger picture kind of arguments. He's posted a couple of videos. One doing an overview of kind of the comparisons that physics is working with, the different talking heads. One playing with, say, field theory, that doesn't involve string theory. Another one that has a particle theory that is string theory, which doesn't make much sense to me. And then in the context of Feynman, trying to say that yes, we understand the we understand there's mechanism because our math says so, but we can't materially make a mechanism, because then we're going to violate conservation laws. So it has to be a virtual field. It still has to be some sort of, it just conveys the information, sort of, kind of a thing. And again, all of these can be sort of understood to be not, as soon as your force isn't moving instantaneously, then you can sort of know that it probably is made out of the same stuff that all the other stuff not traveling instantaneously is made out of. One of these ton things. So again, they do use terminology like virtual photon, and they're actual tons. They're just not photons. Alright, and so there's something useful in he's also talked about how waves are emergent. They're something that comes out of the mechanism, not something that is the mechanism, which, thank you for that. Yay, one for our team. And then the rest of it is this video, which is a critique of me, where he's claiming that his arguments against what I'm saying is not should not be confused as an endorsement for what they're saying. But then he posts this kind of crap as he mirrors a woo video, complete woo, complete bold accusations, claims about how the universe works based on, again, the same kind of garbage interpretations of garbage experiments. Garbage in the sense that there's a ton of assumptions built into these experiments. Frankly, that you can reflect a photon off of a mirror, and that somehow you haven't collapsed its wave function. That somehow the very fact that we know, I think we know, photons are absorbed and readmitted, that somehow the readmitted photon still has its old character somehow. So somehow the electron didn't just admit a new photon, it found the old one and readmitted that, or something like that. Anyway, so I don't want to get into the critiques of those experiments, but I'm just saying there's lots of room to critique the experiments and the assumptions and the inferences drawn from them that are completely based on, once you've allowed unicorns to, once I make leprechauns a real thing, I can make leprechauns responsible for an awful lot of things on Earth. They just become gremlins, essentially. And then once I turn them into gremlins, I can turn them into, hooligans. And then I could turn them into, evil pixies. You just, so once you let the squirmy bits in, then everything's just a byproduct of squirmy bit. So, alright, so to this critique, and my critique of you, Holiday, is just that no, you have just been obnoxious in your petty rejections. You're making absolute statements about what I can or cannot do, or what I have or have not done, and your statements are wrong, plainly wrong. They're grotesquely wrong. They are slanderously wrong. And it's unacceptable. And I don't see you treating the rest of physics that way. And in this sense, I see you mirroring religious videos. And you're telling me that you're playing fair cop. And I'm saying, well, you're obviously not being fair cop. So I'm still going to say fuck you for this fucking attitude and this bullshit. So again, the video starts off with, oh, I'm just an honest guy trying to find honest answers and blah blah blah. And no, you're not. So yeah, fuck you.
Of your own theories and your own methodologies with the endorsement of the current paradigm in physics. You mustn't confuse criticism of yourself and your theories.
My point is that your criticisms of my theories are based on minutiae that you don't even go near with their theories. So I mean, if they left something unanswered, like what does the proton do, which has been unanswered for 300 years, you don't sit there and say everything they're talking about is crap. Do you? No. I mean, the missing details that I haven't provided you are, I mean, I'm not going to call them absolutely minutia, but I mean, they're like arguing, well, how was the original electron created? Well, it really isn't relevant to the function. If I say electrons they appear to be extremely primitive, very durable objects that aren't being remade every 15 seconds, that let's just say they're a function they're a thing that were created in some earlier soup, all right, and they're just something you deal with as a reality now. You don't worry about what creates electrons. Not really, not a significant part of what the gameplay.
With endorsement of the excessive use of metaphor and dumbing down of physics.
Again, that wasn't my accusation against physics, excessive use of metaphor. My accusation is more precise. They're overtly misrepresenting the experiments. I wouldn't care if they had metaphors. I'm not arguing with their metaphors. I'm not arguing because they might say, something is like, but they're not doing that. This isn't a metaphorical argument. Even the time dilation argument, this isn't nothing about a metaphor here. They say there's a spaceship going the speed of light, and there's a spaceship going this way the speed of light. These aren't metaphors.
Even at graduate level, I think the truth comes to graduates when they do.
Well, this part is just too boring, so we'll skip ahead.
But are selling it you as physics rather than a philosophical engagement.
And again, there's no distinction. What there is honest statements and dishonest statements. There are accurate statements and inaccurate statements. My argument is there's a ton of inaccurate statements in conventional physics. They are making claims about what experiments demonstrate that have nothing to do with what the experiment is.
And they speak heavily in metaphor.
Again, you're saying that. I don't see it. So show me the metaphors. I don't see metaphors in the two-slit experiment. I don't see metaphors in arguments about time dilation. I don't even see metaphors in bent space. It's a literal frickin' argument. They're arguing that the space is literally geometrically bent, for fuck's sake. It's not a fucking metaphor. Shit. If it was just a metaphor, then I could say my particle theory duplicates it perfectly. If they were just saying if they were just using it as a metaphor, I could literally argue that your geometry duplicates the presence and density of my polarized gravity identically. And there would be no problem, because they would just say, oh, okay, it fits the metaphor, excellent, we're done then. Because all you have to do is fit the metaphor. So I can fit the metaphor. Obviously, it's not just a metaphor to them. They want the nothing to be telling the something what to do, and they don't want to hear about a something that's actually making the something happen.
Which is a big problem with your physics itself.
Well, again, that's your accusation. My accusation to you is if the metaphor is correct, that is, garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, it's not a bad metaphor. Yes, you put garbage in the meat grinder, then grind it. You have garbage coming out, ground garbage. Yes, not a good thing. I'm obviously obeying conservation rules. I'm saying that, let's see how to put this. Whatever metaphors I'm using, they have the same balance of energy equation, so to speak. The same conservation laws are being obeyed. The metaphor isn't explaining it in some way that's inaccurate. Again, my fish metaphor, what did I do with the fish metaphor? I said, well, look, you have to accept first the fish are all moving the same speed. Okay, the fish can't move, they can't bump into each other and move a half speed or subtract from each other or do any of that kind of thing. They can either just exchange direction and that's it, blah, blah, blah. So I made the restrictions, and those restrictions fit the fucking reality.
Too often you are putting forward the obvious nature of your assertions.
No. What I'm saying is that there's elements that are okay. All of the forces having the same speed. What I'm saying is, hey, that's evidence of something. That's something to pay attention to. That's sort of an interesting fact. If you're trying to unify these forces, the fact that they're all moving at the same speed might be one of the places you start to say, well, what else do they all do the same?
Without clearly detailing where that principle has been outlined, not in its entirety.
Well, in its entirety. Well, again, I frankly, physics has had 300 years since Newton to fuck with this thing. I've been fucking with it for 4 or 5. And you want an entirely detailed model that includes all disciplines of physics. So not only do I have to understand subatomic accelerator physics and cosmology and electromagnetism, yeah, I somehow have to become an expert in all of these fields so I can give you a minutially detailed, explicit description of something so thick in terms of its physics. You know, there's only a trillion of them on the top of the head of a pin. And yes, I'm going to give you so perfect a model that you'll know what every trillion one is doing with my perfect, completed model done in one person's brain. I mean, fuck you and these silly expectations. Einstein didn't have to do that, jackass.
Too often you say things like, well, you can kind of see. Too often you...
Well, you say it's too often. I'm just saying that these are there's comparisons where you say, well, look, we got this phenomenon of, this perpendicular radiation from accelerating electrons. And it's always perpendicular. So you can sort of see that, well, okay, well, what does that mean? If something's coming out perpendicular, then maybe something else is gaining some other direction. So you can kind of see that if you got rid of something that was slowing you down, okay, you go faster in some other direction or something like that. What's wrong with saying it that way? Oh, I don't think there's a goddamn thing wrong with explaining it in real terms. And I think anybody who's going to do that, anybody who's going to really explain physics, they're not going to be allowed to just keep throwing Latin words or sine thetas and say, there, I've explained it.
In a sense it does this, without referring to the literal claim of what...
Well, again, you can't literally do it because that would require for every electron perhaps 1 trillion individual calculations about what every 1/1,000,000th of an electron is doing at this exact second. So that would be preposterous. So there has to be some summing up somewhere, shithead.
It actually is doing. No sense about it.
The sense is just an averaging of the effect. And so again, this is just minutia. This is just nitpicky bull fucking shit.
Ultimate physics, ultimate philosophy is devoid of
so it's devoid of something. No, it's not. It's pretty it's gotten so goddamn complete.
those ambiguous terms, in my opinion.
Well, again, that's your opinion, and I think it's an opinion I can quite fairly point out that's not an opinion you hold any other science to. You certainly don't. Again, you can believe in evolution without having a detailed blueprint of abiogenesis. You get the idea. Yeah, okay, the chemistry took a few 100 million years, okay, to make a DNA molecule.
You say, in your most recent video, you thought it not a good explanation, but in fact it was a good analogy and a good metaphor. This idea of kind of the literal matter doesn't get moved from there to there, but by way of some magical mechanism.
Okay, it's not magical. So again, that's your interpretation. Where did I even imply that I thought it was by some magical mechanism? What I'm saying is that the pattern is moved, okay, through the process of force. Force moves the pattern. Okay, the pattern is displaced in space by actual forces. That is, actual changes or imbalances in field. There's more blue on this side than there is on this side. The thing will be moved. The pattern will move. But it's not, as I was trying to point out, the pattern doesn't have momentum.
Image of the properties are transferred from there to there.
No, the polarization is, which, yeah, okay, the properties, fair enough. That's right, the properties move.
Nowhere is that process detailed.
Again, so this is your accusation. So just 2 videos, 3, 4 videos ago, I've been drawing up this argument. I've been making it over and over again. How, okay, this is a problem I've had to deal with because I want to make a computer model. And I've pointed out how, well, to make the model, I have to understand exactly what these... What exactly is being transferred between electrons and protons, and how do they do this tension that's built into them. They're constantly in this sea of force that's moving back and forth between them. And this was the drawing, you idiots. So don't tell me I haven't done it. This is how complicated it got. Okay, because you're just going with, look, something blue goes in. What's the implications of that? Well, that means more green gets thrown out. And that means that reflects off the other blue. And that means green comes back. But then the EMF is green. So that's going to be hitting the other proton over here. And then this is going to go there. And then I talked about the fact that electrons, in another drawing, move in a perpendicular direction. So what are you talking about? I've gone over this. I don't know, I'll do it again with this cleaner drawing. But again, I don't have it finished yet. But, you know, for you to argue, there's not even anything close to what the science indicates here. This isn't even close to the key. I don't see any notches on this key that's going to open up this unification theory. I don't see how this at all explains electricity or magnetism, even though it fits everything now. It's starting to fit in the sense that you can start to understand why electrons aren't really moving. Okay, they're just kind of vibrating. I mean, they accelerate and decelerate, and through that process release EMF in one direction and release photons in the other direction, which pushes the next electron, which pushes the next electron, and you know, repeating the process. Yeah, this is going to explain a hell of a fucking lot. This is going to explain why electrons don't have classical momentum.
It's not detailed because nowhere have you detailed how it is possible to arrive at a consistent body in the first place.
Okay, so now we're going back to the origins of the universe, so somehow I have to explain how the first little compressed bits, how did the blue get in the electrons, how did the red get in the protons? And in my opinion, this is just bogus because no one's requiring conventional physics. No one gets up in the audience and says, where did the quarks come from? Where did the neutrinos come from? No one's pulling that bullshit and saying, oh, your whole theory is invalidated because you don't have an explanation for what created the first subatomic particles. Fuck you. It's a theory of function, not a theory of origins.
From one frame of update to the next.
well, even your concept of frame of update to the next. We're sort of now, the clock speed, I think, is a nice idea for freezing the universe at any one point of mechanical movement. But as cited, that will require you to draw everything as an arrow. Okay, so you have to draw trillions and trillions and trillions of arrows then to get the update quite right. So maybe that would be like a lost cause. But I mean, I've certainly given every indication that there's one big field. There's tons. And all you can do to the tons is change their color. That is, you can make a red one going this way, go that way. That's it. Or a blue one going this way, go that way. But that's enough. Yeah. To create perpetual traps of pattern.
You've shown one example about, and you cite this as this gets you out of it, but you've not explained how it gets you out of it.
Oh, yeah. Wow, I've explained why it gets me out, but this is how it gets me out. I mean, come on.
The idea of two
It's not a minor idea. It's one that's been around now for at least 2 years in the theory. It's pointed out as being kind of fundamental to the whole function of the magnetic element. And clearly, when I realized that yes, this is why electrons and protons, this is why they function differently, is because they're the origins of magnetism. Is in the electron and the proton, and the fact that they're of this opposite polarization. Shit.
Properties to properties. You show two cases with perpendicular reflections, but what about all the other angles?
Well, what I'm saying is the rules are really simple. There are no other angles. That's the whole point of it. That's why it kind of works so well, is that there are no other angles. So this is what things do. These are the simple rules. So the same rules would go for protons in exactly the opposite configuration. So the protons are red, the electrons are blue. So these are full of just blue stuff. And when blue stuff from the field hits blue stuff, nothing really happens, in the sense that it's just a reflection. That is, the blue thing hits, a blue thing keeps going, and a blue thing comes out. So it's a reflection. This technically is applied a pressure in the sense that the stuff going this way ends up going that way. Obviously, an equal pressure from the other side will just cause the thing going this way to go that way. So it's just trapped back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, in a sense. That's kind of what I'm saying the pressure field is doing. So if all you have this, the blue in here is a little bit compressed. The blue out here just keeps it in its compression. Just keeps it in strings, little strands of energy. It doesn't really matter how you quarks. It doesn't matter. Alright. The other interaction. So blue on blue interaction, essentially nothing happens here. Nothing to see here. Whatever was going one way just keeps going the way it was going. Whatever's going another way keeps going the way it's going. And obviously the only thing that's going to matter is balance. There has to be an arrow going this way. If there's not an arrow going this way, then this thing is going to make an arrow going that way. That's going to be an extra arrow. So when there's no balance, there'll be movement. And that's the whole point here. Everything's constantly jostled. And it's constantly being, with every jostle, with every acceleration and deceleration, there is emission of force, and that force is felt by every neighbor. And so everything is essentially, what an atom is magnetism in tension. It's not magnetism comfortable, it's magnetism in tension. That is, the electrons are pushed towards, by whatever the function of the neutrons are. I haven't nailed any of that down at all. But the point would be is that you have the locking force of the proton, the force that is creating pressure from the outside, because there's a lack of pressure on the inside, so to speak. The proton is producing the blue energy, and the blue is invisible to the electron. The electron is being pushed, and but the point I wanted to get to is just the word tension. It's the creation of the tension. The electrons don't like each other, so they're repelled by their neighbor's force that's coming from them from the side, and they have the attractive force in the middle, but they can't overcome the two forces. The two forces end up being balanced, and that's the tension that's an atom. If I was to break all the connections between them, stop all the forces, the atom would expand rapidly, likely, because there's the force is balancing the excessive out arrow, so to speak. That's the wrong way to put it. Well, we'll just forget about that part, because I want to get to this part. Alright, so look, that's the blue interaction is irrelevant to the electron, let's just say. Now the red is what gets interesting. What I'm saying is when red goes in, it's essentially it's converting a blue. So what's happening is the red goes in, it leaves perpendicularly. That's the EMF. Right there. That's your electromagnetism being created. And we have acceleration in the sense that this is going to now, a blue is going to be converted from going this way to going this way. So we actually lose a blue going this way, because that blue is now converted to one going this way. So now we're plus a blue forward, and we're also have an imbalance of plus here. Even though it's not an extra blue, it's more blue that's going than it's going right. So in a sense, the vector of the electron, okay, just adding those two force vectors, we have an imbalance in two directions. We have an imbalance forward, we have an imbalance to the left, so this will move perpendicular, as a composition of those two vectors. So depending on how many, this could be 5 arrows excessive. So obviously this line could be changed depending on what the balance between those two dimensional influences are. And then we have to add the third dimension here too, so let's not forget that. But anyway, so the vector of the electron is not a straight line. So there we go. And this is, what, doesn't this look a little bit like how lightning works? I mean, see, the parallels can be seen. So when I say it seems, it's like, yeah, you can sort of get it now. Why does lightning look so stupid? It's because it's made of all these stupid electrons. Electrons are provoking the stupidity, because this is how electrons move. So you can imagine that when an electron's coming towards something and it decelerates, it's decelerating in a new vector because it's always changing direction in a non-straight manner. So this is why it takes light longer to get through glass or something, is because the light is going in electrons, out of electrons, in electrons, out of electrons, and constantly doing it in this bizarrely unstraight manner. So, and then the point would be is that when there's so it's all this perpendicular stuff happening. So you can sort of see that now once it has an imbalance in this direction, it can lose that, okay, because another red will hit it. It'll end up releasing an EMF perpendicular to its old velocity, and it can lose that velocity, and that velocity again will bend again to another direction. So it just keeps bending the geometry, but the key element is that it releases force in two ways. It releases the red force perpendicular, so the red force always goes perpendicular, and the blue force, when it decelerates, leaves, well, it also leaves its red force. The blue force doesn't really go anywhere because it's an electron. So all it gets, the blue always stays within, it just changes what dimension it's in. So a blue arrow goes from this dimension to this dimension, or it goes to this dimension, or it goes to this dimension, or it goes to that dimension. The 6 facets of the 3 dimensions is where the blue arrows always end up going. So they're either added to the one dimension, or and they're subtracted from another dimension. and what's really being admitted is just this red crap in the perpendicular. And is there anything, and again, so, and it will appear, so when you release this arrow, see when I get hit with this one from the perpendicular and it releases this one perpendicular, that one will be perpendicular to the force arrow, but it'll actually be completely consistent with the velocity of the electron. So this is essentially a deceleration. The blue will be converted to a different dimension, killing the acceleration in this dimension, and this red arrow will be leaving in the direction that was the velocity of the electron, the old acceleration. And so electrons are constantly being accelerated and decelerated, and they don't really do anything else. They just accelerate and decelerate constantly. They're constantly jittering, constantly moving, and with every movement they burp a conversion. And you can see this with gravity or anything else. I mean, the irony of gravity is that there is going to be a consequence that I think will be quite relevant in some other explanation. What I get to here, though, is the point that if you want to straighten this line of how electrons move, the more force you have going in a direction, that is the direction of the tended vibrations of these electrons, so they're moving this way but not very fast, the way to keep them in line is the more force going this way, the less movement back and forth this way, in a sense, because all of it gets wiped out right away. So any imbalances created going this way and this way are more likely to be wiped out if the force is moving this way, and you'll end up with more just acceleration and deceleration, which means this little electron accelerates and then it releases its energy, accelerates the next electron, it accelerates, EMF is created, the next one accelerates, EMF is created, accelerates, decelerates, pushes it on to the next one. So the force is essentially just being carried through each electron. Okay. Now the other thing I wanted to get to was the gravity. But just how the force thing, like I said, this perpendicular thing. So you have to think about it again as these two spheres, and how any force coming in here, okay, from these vectors, my argument is that yes, it all leaves on these perpendiculars. So no matter what angle it comes at, there's a perpendicular to that angle, and that's what spreads gravity throughout that whole circumference. But it's always a perpendicular reaction. It always obeys the EMF rules. So it's always perpendicular from a different angle. So these are all the angles something can come in. These are all the angles it can leave. But each one of the individual reactions was a perpendicular reaction. They all turned at 90 degrees. There's no need to have a, I come in at 20, you come in at 70, or you come in at 20, I'm coming in at 20. Those interactions don't happen. There's no narrow, almost parallel light beams colliding and then going out. That doesn't happen. Force doesn't interact with force in the field. It only interacts inside these condensed mechanisms of protons and electrons, and it only happens in the sense that this polarized force goes in and it leaves perpendicularly, and it affects the electron or the proton by giving it acceleration, and that acceleration is converted again into a force emanation when they decelerate, and they constantly are getting decelerated because the field energy is constantly balancing them. They're constantly having any imbalance shaved off of them by the weight of the dense balance in the field. And the only place where the weight of the balance of the field is lost is inside the atom, or inside the entire domain, let's say, of a magnet, or inside the domain of an entire organism, and all the electrons flow. Like I said, if I get charged, my whole body gets charged. I end up with electrons everywhere. So my feet can collect them from the ground. They'll shoot up my whole body and come out my finger, for fuck's sake. So yeah, the field is held in imbalance because there is this stream of electrons, and there is eddies and flows, like when they call about eddy currents inside of a magnet. These are kind of real flows, okay, of the force of polarization, and that migration of polarization is what keeps it in the locality. It keeps it local. It keeps it under pressure. It's essentially, again, the argument is that you can have force emanating from one of these things. You could have things located in a position, and the force will go from here, and then the force will go to 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 here, and the force will go to here, and the force will, go to here, and 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 go here. Or it could be a triangle. Or it can just be back and forth. As pointed out, between electrons hitting each other. As the two electrons get closer and closer, these reflections happen more and more often because these arrows don't technically go anywhere. So the reflections are happening more and more often, which is the same thing as more arrows. Technically. If you're compressing the arrows between two things, you're essentially creating more arrows in terms of the force effect. And that's what that's how the universe functions. Okay, now you want a level of detail that's probably 80% higher than that or something, or what? Another 10% maybe? I don't know. You know, the level of detail you want somebody of my my general knowledge to provide you, okay, seems doesn't seem a realistic expectation. And if you're going to be, if it's more than just an expectation, I mean, it's not just a suggestion or a statement like, gee, it'd be nice if. It's kind of like you're saying, I can't believe it unless you. Okay, and that's the part where I'm saying, well, I certainly can believe it without it. I mean, it sure looks pretty damn good. This looks like a damn, you know, if this was a puzzle piece, I mean, here we are sitting there saying, well, let's put the reality puzzle together. Okay, and, well, you know, it seems to me that this piece is like sitting here just saying, hey, the piece you got, Gary, is, yeah, it's got a lot of these things to it. It's got a lot of this shit. It's pretty damn close. I think just a tiny bit of, you know, finagling is going to get that thing sitting right in there. No problem. Because, yes, I have unified the forces. I've turned it all into a simple idea of the energy, the mass starts with mass 1, which is a ton moving the speed of light. There's mass 1. Okay, and you just start adding up the mass ones. You collect them in something called matter. They're somewhat condensed. The condensed particles that aren't particles, they're made of this force, of course, the electron and proton, they can be slightly condensed in terms of maximized in terms of their proximity. The tension can be applied, the pressure from the field. Alright, so I don't think there's much else. But yeah, even he brought up somewhere a little bit of stuff in one of the other videos about the push dynamic, in the sense that, which is really quite interesting, about how you move something. And I was thinking about that in terms of space rockets, and how exactly do they create something called thrust. And what they're really doing, they're not really producing energy and just saying, let's shoot some energy out the back. What they're really doing is sacrificing matter. They're pushing against their own matter. You know, they're giving their matter non-motion to give themselves motion, so to speak. They're stealing the acceleration from the matter they're carrying. So they're carrying something that has acceleration with them, and they're killing its acceleration, okay, to gain more acceleration for the bits that they have left. And if they can expand that matter, that is, you know, create a nice chemical reaction that also expands some of the atoms. In doing that, they can make that matter seem to have more energy in it, more, you know, to increase the number of these little reflections, so to speak, and maximize the effect of depositing their matter, of leaving behind matter as a way of pushing off, so to speak. Keeping all the good polarization, the polarization in the right direction, by dumping the polarization in the wrong direction, kind of a thing. That probably went over your head, but it doesn't really matter. So what do I got to summing up? Well, I'll play some more of this, but it's just this again, this demand that I provide a level of detail that Einstein did not provide with any of his theories, unless you want to say that, yes, okay, the field equations are complex, but they're not a detailed explanation about how this bending of the space happens, or what the space is made out of, and how the hell exactly it bends, and how the hell does the bent space tell the matter what to do. Like, does it give it a phone call and say, I just bent, did you see that? Did you see did you feel the gravity pushing you down? The gravity I'm supposed to be explaining? Again, we know the flaws in this theory, and you've even pointed them out. But then they just say, well, it's a mathematical reality. It's not real reality, so just follow the graph. Follow the bending squares, because the bending squares tell the truth. But do we think the universe is made out of bending squares? I don't think so. But I'm just saying that obviously it didn't take much of a metaphor for the rest of physics to get away with it. And I'm not saying I should be getting away with something. I'm just saying it just seems like whenever I show up for a job, all of a sudden the definition of the job changes. It's like happened my whole fucking life. As soon as Gary has the job, all of a sudden the job includes all this other shit. Like, I gotta start wiping old people's ass, and I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and, you know, I gotta kiss my grandmother on the lips or something. I mean, I gotta do something insane. How come all of a sudden the job changes when it's Gary's job?
They're not perpendicular, is one criticism.
Well, it's a criticism, again, that where it's just built on an assumption that I need that. I don't need that. I don't need there to be any complex geometric interactions. That's what I'm saying. The rules are going to be this simple. This is so goddamn simple. For fuck's sake, there's only one real interaction in the universe. Okay? Well, two, right? There's red hitting blue, okay? And there's blue hitting red. Yeah, which sort of sounds like the same thing, doesn't it? Yeah, that's it, right there. There's the universe. It's going to be that fucking goddamn cunt simple. That's the cause of all of it. All of the change, diversity, pattern creation is right there in that simple, I made a box. That's it. I went back and forth. I made a triangle. That's the geometry that begins it.
It's no great bearing, actually, but
yeah, it's no great bearing, actually, but I need to nitpick and belittle you and insult your intelligence and pretend you haven't done anything and that there's absolutely nothing. Like, this puzzle piece doesn't look exactly like what physics has been missing for 300 years. This doesn't look exactly like what they've been needing the whole fucking time. No, I have to make sure nobody can see that by, belittling and ridiculing it, even though, yes, it does the unification thing. It's completely consistent with conservation, and it explains almost every phenomenon known to man. Gee.
It needs saying.
I don't think it needs saying, especially at this level of the introduction of a theory of reality. I don't think it needs saying at all. I don't think anybody needs to say it. I really don't. I think the theory of evolution does just fine without people haranguing on the subject of where'd the first DNA molecule come from.
You keep referring to this as these are the only two cases, but there's an infinite amount of cases.
Well, again, you're saying there's an infinite number of cases, and I've sort of been pointing out that no, the rules are really simple. There's not an infinite number of cases. There's only two polarizations, 1, 2, okay, and there's only one real interaction, left or right turn.
Is where the angle of incident equals the angle of reflection. But the net result is no trajectories are changed of actual matter. Polarization might be.
Well, again, so that's where this gets kind of a messy thing, where you know, I've said right from the beginning, you have to think of it as one thing or the other thing. You either exclusively think about arrows changing direction, or you think about color being changed. So the arrows all do exactly what they're doing, and the only thing changes is the color of the arrow, or you think about the arrow changing direction and keeping its color. But you can't do both, and I know it's intuitive to do both, but you can't. You either think of color moving, or you think of arrows moving, but you can't do both.
But what actually constitutes matter within your theory, a trajectory, an ultimate destination of the content, doesn't change.
That's right. The arrows don't change. They all go in a straight line forever and ever. That's why the whole whatever the end of the universe question, that's going to be a little complicated, but I think maybe they could be reflecting off the great bubble or something, so I'm not going to worry about that. But the truth is yes, the arrows just keep going in a straight line, and all that happens is at certain places they change color. So this arrow is going forever, and it interacts in this matter thing. The matter thing changes it now to a red arrow. So it was blue, and now it's red. And then it'll hit some other mattery thing, and now it'll go back to blue again. But that's all that's going to happen. One little arrow in a stream of arrows will change colors now and then. Blink, 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 blink. They're blinking into different colors as they transmit through protons and electrons.
It can't be interfered with. And so it's not entirely clear how, statistically speaking, because it's a statistical problem for you to get to contain a conglomerate of bodies.
Again, so he's saying that, okay, you know, that there's a problem with this idea here, that the field pressure kind of creates a situation that no matter where this little blue arrow goes, it's eventually going to hit an arrow coming this way, and it's going to change its direction. So no matter what happens, it could stretch out a little bit, it could go in a little bit, it can't really get out of here, because no matter what happens, it's going to hit the pressure. The pressure is eventually going to get to it. And the only time that doesn't happen is when there's some huge change in the field dynamics that wipes out a whole bunch of this blue and replaces it with red or something. But there's no other way for it to happen. So once it's there, once pattern is trapped, pattern has a really hard time getting out. So it's almost like the opposite of like if I took a vial of black ink and dropped it into a vial of white or water, just plain water, and the way it would disperse, and you couldn't undo the dispersion. Well, it's almost the opposite effect, that once you do isolate something into a clump, it unclumps much more difficultly, okay, than it clumped. It was harder to clump it, it's harder to unclump it than it is to clump it. Something like that. That'll be one of the rules here. But I don't think it's hard to imagine that if there's arrows coming in from all directions constantly, that identity would be hard to get out of here if there's no irregularity in it. So as soon as you have some kind of purity, it stays pure, because there's no way for the impurities to get in.
The statistical likelihood is that any...
Says you. So again, statistical likelihood based on what? So you have this assumption that not only you first off, you don't even think I made this argument, you didn't even think I provided this explanation, and then you have the knowledge to know that somehow I haven't accounted for your statistical perception. And of course, I'm saying yes, I have. As soon as a box or a triangle can be created, there's a perpetual geometry. Something has to break it. It's like the Newton rule. Once it has it, there has to be a force that breaks it. Once it's made, it has to be unmade by a new force.
Collection of quanta,
a new imbalance,
in your theory, will disseminate amongst the...
Yeah, so he's saying by my theory, I'm saying it's disseminating, that everything just falls apart. I'm saying exactly the opposite, and I'm attempting to defend exactly the opposite. So again, this is the kind of crap from you that's just so unacceptable. Over incredible minutia. I mean, incredible fundamental details that I don't think a reasonable person should expect me to be making or providing in a theoretical physics presentation.
Amorphous, structureless whole. There will be statistical likelihoods of periods.
Well, again, said this is all your assumption. So again, based on what? Where do you have the math that it all falls apart? Where do you have the proof that that's what happens? That if I take a field of constant pressure, I put a solid color in this field of multicolored things hitting it by these simple rules, that somehow it disseminates, that it all falls apart. Where do you have the fucking evidence for that? This presumption you're applying, now that I have to disprove. Now, to prove my theory, I have to prove your false and contrived and completely erroneous accusation based on absolutely no mechanical mechanism, based on no, you're not giving me any reason why I should believe that's inevitable.
Of clusters, but will then dissipate.
Again, says you. And again, I've argued that all I have to do to fix dissipation, even if it was a real problem, which I'm saying I don't even think it is, but let's say it is, then all I have to do is make the matter in the electron condensed. That is, it's been pushed together to such a point that they're kind of locked into each other. The quanta are locked. And to break the lock, you have to do a certain extra amount of force has to hit them to break them. So they're made of quarks, and you can't break the quarks. Okay, so there I make a special rule just for Holiday. Are we done with this minutia shit? Because yeah, I can fix it, and I don't have to create anything as elaborate as dark matter to fix it. I just have to say the word quark. There, everybody's heard that word before. There, the electrons are made of quarks, and quarks can't be destroyed. There, are we done? Fuckhead?
You actually have to prove that there's a statistical likelihood in your schema.
Okay, why doesn't normal physics have to do that? Why? I haven't seen them ever do any of that. I don't see how the standard model holds together at all. That barely. I mean, oh, it only takes 49 extra particles for them to keep an atom together. For fuck's sake.
Of there being a cluster here of said properties, and then a cluster here of said properties, of same said properties, and the moving of these things. You've not demonstrated that at all.
Well, it says you again. I don't know how many. What? I haven't demonstrated how this mechanism means that this, if an arrow of a certain color, you have more blue arrows go in here from this side than going from this side. That somehow this thing is probably going to go that way. I haven't explained that. Shit.
And it's difficult. I would cite the Nima video.
No, you can cite that cunt forever. I hate that fucking guy, okay? So he's the last guy on earth I want you to cite because he's so full of monstrous, crappy shit. Okay, I hate him. As a physicist, as a human being, the whole way he talks, the whole way he presents anything, I hate that fucking cunt.
When he talks on philosophy.
I mean, I'd rather you've forced me to watch, you know, I wish there were more Feynman videos, frankly. I'd rather, yes, Feynman was easy to watch compared to that shithead.
Of science. Where we concede this all might be bogus none.
Yeah, yeah, Feynman was really quite, he was right there, you know, he was inches away from getting it, which is so funny, because he uses the thing, he says, look, it could be a checkerboard, there's just a ton of checkers. I mean, actually said shit like that, you're just like, God, well, why didn't you just go with that for a day? Just go with that for one day, you know, and you would have got it.
Ultimate truth. But the way science works is this
I mean, if he would have just thought, black checkers, red checkers. Hey, yeah, I can make that work.
Conservatism, and by looking to utility of theories.
Yeah, again, well, that's all irrelevant, because we're not talking about the utility. That isn't what made these guys. Einstein's theories had no fucking utility, so don't give me this crap. It has nothing to do with utility. Alright, I mean, string theory, where's the utility in string theory? There's no utility in any of this crap. There's no fucking utility in Copenhagen or many worlds or any of these interpretations or 90% of what the story being told is. And it's about the story, it's about the narrative, about how reality is being described. Particle wave, this is the real important shit, so this crap about utility has absolutely nothing to do with this.
And throwing out the whole basket of assumptions about waves and fields and all the progress that has been done.
No, you don't need to talk about wave-particle duality to understand Maxwell's equations. You don't have to worry about wave-particle duality to understand that gravity is a force, that you know, the Earth is getting accelerated in a new vector and blah, blah, blah. You don't need any of that shit. You don't need to argue wave-particle duality to understand the mechanisms. I'm just saying, but it's completely easy to create a particle model that works, for fuck's sake, and that's the point.
About models that work. And
I mean, how many times are you going to... I've asked you, I've said, look, there was only one thing wrong with Lesage gravity, particle gravity. The only thing wrong with it is they couldn't make it thermodynamically neutral. And I pointed out, well, haven't I solved that with this kinetic argument? The kinetic argument basically is that a head-on collision is the most irrelevant event in the universe. Absolutely nothing happens. So the most dramatic thing is the least dramatic. So yeah, I got rid of the heat problem, for fuck's sake.
Have a utility to science as that endeavour of making predictions.
Well, again, 90% of all this crap I'm arguing has nothing to do with making any motherfucking cunt predictions. And all these assholes who keep talking about all this stuff that was done through quantum mechanics, no, it was done through experiments, and everybody knows that who's ever worked in a lab. That, you know, it's not, you're not doing theoretical experiments, you're doing real world ones, and you just start gluing shit on shit. You start just mixing shit together. You just say, I wonder what'll happen if I pour this in. That's how you do fucking God. That's invention is Edison all the way down.
It's just so incredibly hard. In fact, he says every time you try to make a fundamental change to it, it almost is...
Well, they don't make fundamental changes. That's the whole goddamn point. They really don't. They just keep trying to make two things that are fundamentally incompatible compatible. So, you know, and then they keep doing this idiotic thing, which is every exchanged and strangulated piece of shit that comes out of that stupid Hadron Collider, these things that live for 1/1000th of a second, they keep trying to make them fit. And what's the point? What's the point of taking scatter from explosions and saying, let's make that part of particle in atomic theory? Absolutely no point, in my opinion. The Nixon potato chip, let's make it mean something. It can't mean anything. If you're trying to make the Nixon potato chip mean something in the universe, like it has some Nostradamus, it was destined to be, it's going to be president again. The potato chip will be elected president again. I mean, if you try to make it mean something, you're being an idiot. It's just a fucking freak of the nature.
Invariably so easy to instantly dismiss it. So people don't.
Now we're not talking about people. We're talking about you, cunt. somebody I've known for years, who hasn't done one fucking thing to encourage this process, and yet with all the stumbling blocks, when you think of how wrong I was initially, I mean, like, that's when I had the right metaphor, the school of fish, but not the correct mechanism, alright? And look how I have fixed it and fixed it and fixed it and fixed it and fixed it with all your stupid objections. And you're still talking like, there's nothing to see here. And that's just crap.
So radically against the stream of mainstream science because it's so hard. And I guess ultimately...
Well, again, it's so hard if you can't even get a chance to argue it. And no, you can't get a chance to argue it if everybody just keeps saying, oh, he's just a lunatic homeless man, or he's, all the stuff Einstein didn't get. Imagine if people just said, oh, he's just a fucking Jew, or blah, 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 blah. No, he didn't get any of this shit.
The hope is, by the mathematical insights from where we're at, studying string theory...
Yeah, whatever. See, that's where you just go off the fucking reservation altogether. Just complete crap. I mean, as a premise, let's create a mechanism that's, again, more complicated than bent space. So let's go one level more ludicrous and create a substructure that tells all the other crap what to do. The magical substructure. Power ether. Magic Powerball ether.
Quantum mechanics and such. Maybe it will come full circle through some productive chain of reasoning, and it may well reveal all those silly assumptions we made at the beginning. Ultimately it must, if it's to be correct in some sense.
Well, again, and I've pointed out the assumptions. I mean, just the simple ones. And there should be a concession that it does seem a little strange that in 300 years, physicists didn't have any kind of conversation like, well, maybe this idea of pull gravity is stupid because pull is complicated. Why don't we just make it push? I mean, what happens if we make it push? What kind of bad thing happens?
But until those future days comes, pretty much most of science understands that they're building a model, and it's at the...
No, they've just chosen sides. Their models are convoluted pieces of shit. They have to concede it. Many of them are even conceding it. Well, we're not going to be able to reconcile this with that, so guess what? Something's got to be broken. So they're making some concessions, but most of them have their favorite football team, and that's all they care about. And they'll just throw bottles at anybody who's a fan of anything else.
Extremes, it's hardly accepted wisdom. Not everybody is pursuing that model even.
I can't argue with anybody. I can't argue with everybody. I can just argue with assholes willing to have a conversation on the internet.